Have you ever heard that story about the ox and the county fair? That's a classic.
Oh yeah, the one where a bunch of random people guessed the ox's weight.
Exactly. Back in 1906, this scientist, Francis Galton, he was fascinated by it. How accurate the crowd's guess was.
I remember reading about that. It was shockingly close, wasn't it?
Shocking. The average guess was only 1 pound off the actual weight. Just 1 pound.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it, about where intelligence truly resides.
Right. So that's what we're diving into today, the wisdom of crowds. How it works, when it's brilliant, and when it totally backfires.
It's a phenomenon that pops up everywhere, from predicting election results to, well, guessing the weight of an ox.
And we've got some pretty amazing stories and research to unpack.
We'll look at the stock market, the Challenger disaster, even how this wisdom of crowds thing might predict Oscar winners.
All right, so first things first. How can a group of average folks, people with no special expertise, be so accurate? Like, how did they nail that ox's weight?
It's all about the magic of averaging. Think of it like this. Imagine a bunch of people shooting arrows at a target.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Now, their individual shots might be all over the place, right? Some hit the bullseye, some are way off.
Yeah, a pretty random spread.
But here's the thing. When you average out all those shots, the center of that spread, well, it lands incredibly close to the bullseye.
So you're saying individual errors, they kind of balance each other out.
Exactly. But for this to really work, there are a few key ingredients we need.
Let's hear 'em.
Diversity of opinion is crucial. You need a mix of perspectives, different bits of information. If everyone's thinking the same way, you're not getting the full picture.
Makes sense. It's like having a brainstorm session where everyone agrees with the first idea. Not very innovative.
Precisely. The second ingredient is independence. People need to form their opinions without being swayed by others, without that pressure to conform.
Right. You don't want everyone just echoing the loudest voice in the room.
Exactly. Then you have decentralization. This is about tapping into local knowledge, specialized expertise, different folks bringing different skills to the table.
So it's about valuing a range of experiences, not just a single expert opinion.
Precisely. And finally, you need a way to combine all these individual judgments, some way to aggregate those diverse opinions.
So we're talking about voting, taking averages, maybe even using some fancy algorithms to pull it all together.
Exactly. You got to bring all those individual pieces together into a cohesive picture. But here's the thing. Crowds aren't always wise, are they?
Yeah, sometimes they get things spectacularly wrong. Like, what's going on in those cases?
That's when things get really interesting. We have to talk about information cascades. Basically, situations where early decisions, even if they're flawed, create a bandwagon effect.
It's like that saying, if all your friends jumped off a bridge. But maybe in this case, it's more like, if everyone's investing in this stock, it must be a good idea.
That's a perfect example. Think back to the 19th century and the plank road
The
craze.
plank roads.
Yeah, everyone was convinced these wooden roads were the future. Easy to build, affordable, the answer to expanding transportation.
Sounds good on paper, but
The problem was they rotted super quickly, turned into muddy messes, but people had already invested so much money and effort they kept on building them.
even though it was clearly a bad idea.
Exactly. They were trapped in that information cascade, even though it was leading them down a, well, rotten path.
So even with good intentions, crowds can get swept up in bad ideas.
Absolutely. And it reminds us how important it is to think critically, to question those assumptions, even when everyone around you seems certain.
It's like picking a restaurant just because there's a long line. It could be amazing, or it could just be hype.
That's a great analogy. And speaking of decisions based on what others are doing, have you ever thought about NFL coaching decisions?
Football? Sure, I'm a fan. What about it?
Well, there's a ton of data analysis in football these days, right? And this data has revealed something interesting about those fourth down calls.
You mean when a team has to decide whether to go for it or punt the ball away?
Exactly. Research, specifically by David Romer, shows that statistically, teams would do better by being more aggressive on fourth down.
So going for it more often.
Yes. But time and again, coaches play it safe. They go for the punt, even when the stats say it's not the best move.
So sticking to that traditional playbook, even if it might hurt their chances of winning.
It seems counterintuitive, doesn't it? But it speaks to the power of conformity, that aversion to risk. Coaches, they're in high-pressure situations. They'd rather avoid criticism than make a bold move.
So it's not just the numbers. It's human nature at play, that fear of standing out, even when it's the smarter choice.
Precisely. And this tendency to follow the crowd, it's not just on the football field. We see it in finance, too, like with those mutual fund managers.
Oh, yeah, the folks managing big chunks of money. People trust them to make smart choices.
They're supposed to be experts, right? But studies show that even they're susceptible to this herding behavior.
Meaning they're following trends instead of making their own assessments.
You got it. They mimic each other's strategies, even if those strategies aren't great or even risky.
Why would they do that?
Because it's safer to fail conventionally than to succeed unconventionally. If they make a unique bet and it goes bad, huge criticism. But if they follow the crowd and everyone loses, well, at least they're not alone.
Wow, that's fascinating. The people we rely on to make the smartest decisions are often pressured to conform.
And that can have ripple effects throughout the whole market, contributing to bubbles, crashes, all sorts of instability.
It's like our brains are wired to fit in, even when it goes against our best interest.
And that brings us to the next layer of complexity, cooperation. How do we balance individual needs with working together for the greater good? That's a question that has puzzled people for centuries, and we'll explore it right after this.
All right, so we've talked about how crowds can be smart, but also how they can get things wrong. But cooperation, that feels different.
It is, and it's a big part of how societies actually work, right? How markets function, how we tackle those really tough problems. You see, with cooperation, it often means putting aside our own immediate wants for the greater good.
Yeah, and we're not always great at that, are we? It's like, give me my slice of the pie and give me it now.
That's the age-old struggle, isn't it? But let's look at a real-world example. Remember that whole Richard Grosso thing?
Oh, yeah, when he was head of the New York Stock Exchange and that huge compensation package.
Exactly. It caused a huge uproar. People were furious that he was making millions while the market was tanking and investors were losing money left and right.
It was a big scandal.
It was. Now, purely from an economics perspective, his pay was just the market at work, right?
Yeah.
His skills were in demand, the NYSE was willing to pay, but the public reaction showed there was something else going on.
Something deeper, yeah.
A sense of fairness. It wasn't just the money. People felt it was wrong, like he was taking advantage of the system. And that sense of fairness is a big part of how we cooperate.
Right, like if we're all going to play this game together, the rules got to be fair.
Exactly. And to really understand this, we have to take a little detour into game theory. Have you ever heard of the ultimatum game?
I don't think so. What is it?
Okay, imagine two players. One gets some money, let's say $100, and they have to decide how to split it with the other player.
Sounds simple enough.
But the other player can accept or reject the offer. And if they reject it, nobody gets anything.
Oh, so there's some pressure to make a fair offer.
Right. But here's the thing. If we were just thinking like pure economic robots, the first player should offer like $1.
Really?
And the second player should take it. Because, hey, $1 is better than nothing.
Yeah, but that feels kind of insulting, though, like you're being ripped off.
And that's what happens in reality. Studies show people often reject unfair offers, even if they lose out on some money. And the person making the offer, they know this, so they tend to offer a more even split.
So we're not just greedy machines. We care about fairness, even if it costs us.
Precisely. And that sense of fairness is a foundation for trust. It lets us do those complicated transactions, build societies, work together.
I bet there are times when that trust breaks down, though, right? When it all falls apart.
Absolutely. Think about those accounting scandals we talked about before, Enron, WorldCom. Investors trusted a flawed system, trusted people who put greed above the good of everyone else.
It's like, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. But with trust, once it's broken, it's so hard to get it back.
It really is. That's why we need ways to stop that exploitation. Make things transparent, hold people accountable. Things like regulations, watchdog groups, even good journalism. They help keep that trust from crumbling.
So it's like a balancing act. You need to encourage cooperation, but also protect against being taken advantage of.
Exactly. This whole tension between working together and looking out for, number one, it pops up in some surprising places. Even in TV ratings.
Okay, now you've got my attention.
Yeah.
TV ratings, what about that?
Well, the TV industry has used this system called sweeps for ages. It's this outdated way of measuring viewership.
I'm not really familiar with it.
So a few times a year, they really intensely track how many people are watching certain shows.
Oh, like it's more important those specific times.
Yeah. It's kind of like cramming for a test instead of, studying regularly throughout the semester. And it creates all these weird problems.
Like what?
Networks air their most sensational stuff during sweeps. It doesn't show what people are really watching day to day, and it messes up how they decide on what shows to make.
So they know it's a bad system, but they keep using it.
That's the crazy part. It's a classic collective action problem. Everyone would be better off with a better system, but no single network wants to be the one to change first. They don't want to lose their edge.
So they're all stuck,
Okay.
even though it's not good for anyone in the long run.
Exactly. It shows that even in industries that are supposed to be innovative, sometimes self-interest wins out over doing what's smart.
Okay, so we've got diversity of thought, independence, and now this cooperation piece.
Yeah.
It seems like they all work together, right? Like you need all of them to make the wisdom of crowds really work.
You're spot on. And there's one more piece to this puzzle. We need to look at decentralization. It's often misunderstood, but it's super important to how collective intelligence actually functions in the real world.
All right, let's decentralize our brains and dive in. All right, decentralization. It sounds kind of technical. What does it really mean when we're talking about collective intelligence?
Well, it's really interesting, actually. It gets to the core of how we deal with information, knowledge and making decisions. Decentralization basically means spreading out power and control instead of having it all in one place.
So not just one big brain making all the calls, but a network of like smaller brains working together.
Exactly. And that kind of distributed approach can be super powerful. Take the internet, for example.
Okay, yeah, the internet.
It's a decentralized network of computers, right? And that's what makes it so resilient, so adaptable. There's no single point of failure. Information can flow from everywhere.
That makes sense. But wouldn't things get kind of chaotic without someone in charge, keeping everything organized?
That's a good question. Decentralization doesn't mean no structure or coordination. It's about finding that sweet spot between autonomy and integration. Actually, let's look at a real-world example that shows this tension. Remember the 9/11 attacks?
A terrible tragedy that showed how flawed our intelligence gathering was.
Exactly. The 9/11 Commissioner report, it highlighted this major problem. Different intelligence agencies, they were like silos, hoarding information, not connecting the dots.
So in that case, being decentralized actually made things worse.
Ironically, yeah. When decentralization is done poorly, it can lead to fragmentation. No one sees the whole picture. It's like having all these amazing musicians playing different instruments, but they're not following the same sheet music, just a bunch of noise.
Right, you need a conductor to bring it all together, make it into music.
Precisely. Now, let's look at an example where decentralization worked brilliantly open source software. Specifically, Linux.
Linux, that free software that runs tons of servers and devices.
That's it. Linux is a prime example of decentralized collaboration. Thousands of programmers all over the world contributing, each with their own skills.
So a real testament to the power of the crowd, huh?
Absolutely, but here's the key. Even though the development process is decentralized, there's still a central figure, Linus Torvalds, the guy who created Linux. He's the one who makes sure all those contributions fit together.
So you've got that distributed creativity, but also someone to make sure it all works as a whole.
Exactly. And that balance, it's super important. Getting the benefits of decentralization without losing that coherence.
Seems like finding that balance is a challenge in a lot of areas, not just software.
Absolutely. And it brings us back to the intelligence community. After 9/11, everyone was trying to figure out how to improve information sharing. One idea was internal prediction markets.
Prediction markets, like where people bet on what might happen.
Exactly. The thought was to create a platform where intelligence analysts could use their collective knowledge to anticipate threats, terrorist attacks, things like that.
Wow, using the wisdom of crowds for national security.
Exactly. It was called the Policy Analysis Market, or PAM, the idea being that a decentralized market of experts could make better predictions than those traditional top-down structures.
Sounds pretty interesting. What happened? Did it work?
Well, PAM got a ton of pushback and was eventually shut down.
Really? Why was that?
There were a lot of concerns. Some folks had ethical issues with profiting off of potentially tragic events. Others worried about manipulation, insiders or bad actors influencing things.
It seems like it could have been a useful tool, though, right, for gathering and analyzing intelligence.
It's debatable. The whole PAM thing really highlights the ethical and practical challenges of using prediction markets, especially in sensitive areas like national security.
So it's not just about throwing up a betting platform and seeing what happens.
Exactly. It requires careful thought about how to design, implement, and regulate these kinds of systems.
So we've talked about diversity, independence, cooperation, and now decentralization. All these pieces seem to fit together. Like you need them all to really get the benefits of the wisdom of crowds.
You're absolutely right. And the cool thing is that this applies not just to huge systems like, intelligence agencies or software development, but to our everyday lives too, like how we navigate a busy city, pick a restaurant, decide who to trust.
It's like we're always using the wisdom of crowds without even thinking about it.
Exactly. And the more we understand about how it works, the better we can use it to make good choices, both on our own and as a society.
This deep dive has been fascinating. We started with that story about an ox at a county fair and ended up exploring all these complex ideas about collective intelligence. It's amazing to think about how the wisdom of crowds is all around us, shaping our world.
And the big takeaway is that the wisdom of crowds, it's not a magic bullet, but it's a powerful tool that we can use for good. The challenge is to build systems that encourage diverse thinking, independent judgment, and a willingness to work together. When we do that, we can unlock the incredible potential of collective intelligence, solve complex problems, make better decisions, create a more resilient and informed society.
That's a fantastic point to end on. Thanks for taking us on this journey.
It's been a pleasure.